So we go from one edgy as fuck anime to another edgy as fuck anime. It's exactly how the fuck we do things this year. So yeah, for day 9 I decided to pick Violence Jack. And it's a 3-episode OVA series that started from 1986 to 1990. And it was based after a manga from Go Nagai that came out in 1973. And what's hilarious to me is that I usually see some people saying how it's a ripoff of Fist in the North Star and Mad Max, and I'm over here like, well, this like predates all of that. So if you think about it, this anime is kind of influential in many ways. And one fun little fact that I know is that the video game director, Suda51, said that Violence Jack is actually one of his favorite books. So that probably explains why some of his games can be pretty freaking crazy. So as for the 3 OVAs, they are titled Harem's Bomber, Evil Town, ooh, what a scary name that is, and then Hell's Wind. So now, let's get talking about the story. So it takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where there are gangs doing a lot of shitty things. So yeah, exactly like Fist in the North Star, but remember, this came out first originally. And our main character doesn't have a name, but instead he takes upon himself to name himself Violence Jack. And his reason is because he carries around a really huge ass jackknife. Yeah, not even kidding. So not only is he tall as fuck, but he's also strong as fuck too. And he protects those that are weaker than the pieces of shit. And it's been said that apparently that Violence Jack is actually a reincarnation of Akira Photo from Devilman, and you know what? I can definitely see that. Not just because it's from the same creator, and also he likes to put in a lot of like hidden Easter eggs and stuff connected to his other works, but mostly for that, he does kind of remind me of him in many ways, like whenever he goes berserk. But yeah, all I have to say is that the story in this one is not really all there. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff, you know, like in Evil Town, for an example. Everything is underground and there's 3 different sections of different gangs. You got Group A, Group B, and Group C. So Group A has the more like higher ups, like all like the business people, and then Group B has the more like punks and scum, and Group C is all women. And as you can imagine, they all do a lot of shitty things to each other, like steal food, killing people, and worst of all, they rape each other. And Violent Jack is in the middle of all of this shit. But he ends up helping out Group C because he knows for a fact that no one in Group C is a complete fuckhead. So yeah, that's basically to sum up the entire plot of this, is that it's just shitty people do shitty things. But of course, I'll talk more about certain scenes later on. So now, let's get moving on to the other things, like the animation. And if you watch all 3 of these episodes, you'll notice that the quality of the animation varies between them. I mean, you had one that came out in 86, 88, and 1990. And even if you just watch only one of these episodes, the animation is still very inconsistent. So there is a couple good things I can say, and there is also a couple bad things I can say. So as for the good, I do really like the art style in here, I do like it a lot, and I also really do like the character designs as well. There's a lot of really cool characters in here, like not only do I really like Violent Jack's character design, but I also really like the Slum King's design too, and a couple other characters I thought were pretty interesting looking as well. And I do like some of the backgrounds in here as well. Yeah, sure, a lot of it does take place underground and some like really dull looking areas, but it makes sense because it is very fitting to that. But now, as for the blood and gore though, now this is the one thing that everyone always talks about when it comes with Violence Jack, is that it's actually one of the most violent animes ever made. And after rewatching it all these years later, all I have to say is that it wasn't as violent as I remember it being. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is a lot of blood that happens within here, and a lot of decapitations too. But the thing with me is that what I look for is not so much like the fact that there's so much like blood and death and shit, it's the attention to detail that goes into the violence that makes it more shocking to me. And in this case, I think there was only like 2 death scenes that were actually pretty well detailed, and then the rest of it just felt kinda cheaply made, honestly. But I don't know, maybe it's because of the fact that I'm rewatching this like not long after rewatching Genocyber, and of course there's also the fact that I watched Midori before. But yeah, I'd say that Evil Town definitely had the most consistency with its blood and violence though. Like, there was a part where Violent Jack ended up, like, cutting a person in half, and he saw, like, his intestines and shit. I thought that was probably the most graphically detailed part about its blood and gore. But then in Hell's Wind, you actually have a chainsaw cutting scene where, like, whenever the dude cuts his chest open, you see his guts coming out. The way how the guts is drawn is, like, so poorly done, it almost looks like pink popcorn. I'm not gonna lie, I actually thought it was kind of comical. So that's what I mean, that there's a bit of a weird mixture here, and it's just very uneven, I'd say. But probably the most shocking part about this anime that is not the rape scene is that this anime actually had the balls to actually kill off kids on screen. Yeah, Genocyber did the same thing, although it's not nearly as well animated as it was in there, but the way how it happened in here, though, was still pretty fucked up. I mean, a fat kid ends up getting his head cut off. That was probably the most violent part about that. But that entire scene was actually cut out on most of the English versions of this anime. I don't think the one in Genocyber was cut out from any versions as far as I know, but just having a scene like that, though, is just Jesus fucking Christ. So yeah, that's probably the most shocking that this anime gets, but back to what I was saying with the blood and violence, though, is that yeah, it's very inconsistent. Like, you got some deaths that were, like, really over the top and were actually pretty well detailed, and then you got some that were still over the top, but just seemed to lack any sort of quality to them. Also, the animation flow overall is very inconsistent as well. So yeah, some fight scenes and action scenes are pretty cool and entertaining and are well done, and then you got some that are not so much. Like the scene where everything is all like red and black. Yeah, it almost looks like a Virtual Boy game. But yeah, overall, I would say that the animation is a mixed bag. A very mixed bag. So now, as for the show's music, the music in this one, I actually really like it a lot. And for an edgy as fuck anime like this, it does indeed have a lot of metal. So in the first episode, it kind of has this like 70s like proto-metal. It's kind of interesting, I kind of like it, but I'd say in Evil Town, that's where like the music gets like really hard and kicking. And episode 3's music was pretty good too. But as much as I love all of that though, one of the most coolest sounding songs that was not metal related that was also very fitting was when Jack first appeared and he grows out from the rocks. The music at that part was just pretty epic, and you knew exactly that shit was about to go down. So I really love that a whole lot, and as for the other stuff, they're pretty good as well. Nothing much I can complain about, but yeah, overall, a pretty good OST if I say so myself. Now, as for the show's voice acting, if you're gonna watch this one in English, it is as shitty as it is edgy, so meaning that it's pretty fucking shitty. But I do think that the dub on this one is definitely a lot more hilarious than it was in Genocyber. Like, you got some lines like, "Why hello, Captain Buttwipe," which is pretty damn corny, but also kinda awesome at the same time. But probably the most hilarious one to me, though, was like whenever the guy's like, "Fucking chicken shit, fucking shit, fucking shit." And that right there, folks, sums up the brilliance of this anime. Yeah, I can't say much else about it, but yeah, the Japanese voice acting though, it doesn't seem to have as much swearing within it, so if you want to have a less fucking version of it, there is that, but then again, the Japanese version is also uncut, so in the end, the Japanese version is still more edgier. Also, one fun thing that I do know about the Japanese version is that the main character, Jack, was actually played by Unsho Ishizuka. In case you don't know, he actually played Joseph Joestar within JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and he even played Heihachi Mishima at one point, and even Professor Oak, so yeah, that's pretty amusing. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Violence Jack, is that... Well, before I get into my current thoughts, I'll tell you what I first thought about it when I saw it like many years ago, around the same time when I watched Genocyber, funny enough. And at that time, when I first saw it, I thought this anime was pretty shit. And one of my main reasons why I thought it was shit was because I thought it was like a complete rip-off of Fist of the North Star, but not nearly as good. But of course, at that time though, I didn't know about Violent Jack being like a lot older than that, at least when it comes to its source materials. So yeah, kind of a stupid reason back then, but you know, I didn't know any better. But now I do, and I learned from my mistakes about it. And after watching it again with a more fresh open mind, and hopefully maybe my opinion could change. It happened with Genocyber, it could happen with this too. And I can tell you that my opinion has changed a bit. I definitely don't think it's shit anymore, but I wouldn't say it's really that good. I would say it's average. Now, I'm willing to bet that the book is probably like a bajillion times better, like how some of these OVA series tend to be, but for what it is as its own and without comparing it to all this other shit that I've seen, I thought it was okay. It wasn't like horrific, but it also wasn't like good at all. So I'd say that calling it average is pretty fair, because the story in this one is really not that good at all. I mean, it doesn't really try to be good, which is something I can give it credit for, is that it actually knows what it's trying to be. It's very non-pretentious. But even at that, I still think that the story in this one is really just very average. And while some of the death and carnage within here was pretty fun for what it was, especially whenever like the pieces of shit rapist people like get their ass kicked, that was probably the most satisfactory thing. That's another thing I can give it credit for, is that at least this anime does have some satisfying moments. But then some of the violence in this is, like I said, some of it is just so cheap and low budget looking. And I'm not just comparing that to modern animation, I just mean even like back then, I thought like the animation of it could have been a whole lot better. I mean shit, like look at the anime movie Midori. That movie was made with like barely any budget and had like way more graphic detail than this. Now sure, it doesn't have a huge amount of body count, but I found that like every death scene that happened within it was like super shocking and memorable, where this, I really couldn't remember much of the blood and the gore within it, other than the whole, like, deaf child scene. But I would still put this on like, my top 5 most violent animes I've ever seen, but I would say it's probably in, like, my 5th place. Yeah, I know most people wouldn't agree with that, and that's totally cool, but like I said, though, what I like to look for within, like, blood and gore is really the amount of crazy details that go into it, and also the shock value as well, where this definitely does have the shock value, but the amount of detail that went into it, though, that to me could have used a lot more work, but I'm pretty sure that the manga's, like, blood and gore, though, was probably a lot more heavily detailed. I'm sure it was. But anyways, enough about the blood and shit. But as for recommendations, though, yes, just like Genocyber, I can't recommend it to most people. I mean, if you want to have, like, an edgy as fuck anime that, like, doesn't have much of a story at all, then yeah, go nuts, watch this shit. But otherwise, it's to be avoided. I mean, I would definitely recommend this more so over Midori, I'll tell you that. Or at least this actually has some satisfactory within seeing some pieces of shit get killed, where in that film, unfortunately, like, it was just mentally exhausting. But yeah, overall, I would say that Violent Jack is better than I remember it being, which is a good thing, but it just comes off as pretty average though. Not great, but definitely not terrible. But I can perfectly understand why people would say this anime is terrible though. And in my personal experience of watching animes based after Go Nagai's work, this is probably my least favorite one. Of course, I haven't seen everything, but just out of the ones I've seen, yeah, I'd say this is my least favorite. But having my least favorite only being average, though, I gotta say, that's still a pretty damn good track record. And the next one I'm gonna be reviewing, yeah, I found myself another fucked up anime, so oh joy, we'll see how this goes.